Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Ernest Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. The final college football playoff rankings are out before the real ones matter. Next week, the college football playoff rankings are going to be the ones that determine which teams make the college football playoff, but we are a week away, and we are 10 conference championship games away from that time, and there's going to be a few games that are going to determine which teams do make the college football playoff. I'm going to go over which teams I think can still make the college football playoff, and I'm going to go over every single remaining college football playoff scenario of teams that could win their way into the playoff or lose their way out. Now, looking at the college football playoff rankings, you see the top four teams here. Georgia's at number 1, Michigan's at number 2, Washington's at number 3, and Florida State is at number 4, and that is not a shock at all whatsoever because every single one of these teams are undefeated. And all I have to say about these four teams is if they win this weekend, all four of these teams are in. If Georgia can beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, they're guaranteed in. Even if Georgia loses to Alabama, they're more likely in. It would take a massive blowout loss for Georgia, like 60-0, for even the committee to consider knocking them out. And even then, I wouldn't even be sure because it's Georgia and they have such a commanding lead over everybody else in the rankings. But still, Georgia, they should be in the playoffs as long as they win. And even if they lose, they still could get in. Michigan's at number 2. And again, if they beat Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, which will be a lot easier, mind you, than Georgia beating the Alabama Crimson Tide. Michigan beating Iowa will be a cakewalk. The Iowa Hawkeyes are not on the Michigan Wolverines level, and it would be a massive shocker if the Hawkeyes could pull it out. Michigan is an over 20-point favorite over the Hawkeyes. So the Wolverines, if they take care of business, they're in the college football playoff. If they lose, things can get dicey because of the fact losing to Iowa would be a much worse loss than Georgia losing to Alabama. But Michigan could still get in if teams like Alabama, Texas, Florida State lose. Michigan could get in that final spot at number 4 with a loss. But the Wolverines do not want to risk it. A win and they're in, and a loss, and they might have to sweat things out a bit. Washington's at number 3, and they've got the worst possible matchup to have to try to get into the college football playoff, facing the Oregon Ducks on Friday night. I think a lot of people believe that if Washington loses this game, they're not going to get into the college football playoff. Obviously, like with Michigan and Georgia, Washington could still get in with a loss if things break their way, like Alabama losing, Texas losing, and the Florida State Seminoles losing. Then Washington could grab that number 4 spot because you would believe that they would get in over the Ohio State Buckeyes, who lost to the Michigan Wolverines and couldn't go to the Big Ten championship game. Washington would have a loss in the Pac-12 championship game, so more likely they would be the team that got in that scenario. But if Florida State wins, Texas and Alabama win, Washington would fall out with a loss to the Oregon Ducks, but a win and they are in for sure. Then at number 4, you got the Florida State Seminoles, and like the top teams, they have to win and they are in. Louisville is a decent opponent. They are a solid football team that's had a pretty good year, but they are a team that's not as good as Florida State. But the biggest issue for the Seminoles is that Jordan Travis, their starting quarterback, is out for the season. And you saw the way Florida State played at Florida. They did not look as good in that game. And some people are worrying that if Florida State wins against Louisville and makes the college football playoff, that they're going to get destroyed against whoever they play because Tate Rodemaker will not be able to lead the Seminoles to a close game against Georgia, Michigan, Washington, Oregon, any of those opponents. And some people believe even with Jordan Travis, Florida State would not be able to compete in those games either. But regardless, if Florida State beats Louisville, even without Jordan Travis, the College Football Playoff Committee is going to let them in because they're undefeated, and there's not enough teams that are undefeated as well to be able to leapfrog Florida State. They're one of the only 4 undefeated teams left, and even if Oregon was able to beat Washington, Florida State would still get in over the Washington Huskies because they're undefeated and the Huskies would have 1 loss. If Florida State loses, however, they're probably done. I do not see any scenario where the Seminoles can get in with a loss to Louisville. Basically, every single team would have to lose. Oregon, Alabama, and Texas, and even then, I think the College Football Playoff Committee would probably put in the Ohio State Buckeyes over Florida State because without Jordan Travis and the fact that their strength of schedule is weaker than the Ohio State Buckeyes, I still don't think that they would get in. So Florida State, they have to win, and a loss, they're more than likely out. For the Oregon Ducks, who are at number 5 in the college football playoff rankings, with that 1 loss to Washington, this is the last football team that all they have to do is win and they're in. Because if they beat Washington in the rematch in the Pac-12 championship game, this team is going to make the college football playoff, even if Florida State and Michigan and Georgia win. And even if Georgia loses to Alabama and Texas wins as well, and those teams can creep up, I do believe that Oregon would get in over both because they went over an undefeated Washington team in the Pac-12 championship game. Plus, the way that Oregon's been playing lately and the numbers that Bo Nix is putting up with the possibility of winning the Heisman, I believe that the Oregon Ducks would get into the college football playoff over those teams, especially because they're at number 5 and Texas and Alabama are down there at 7 and 8. Oregon, a win and they're in, and a loss obviously ends their chances for sure. And then at number 6, Ohio State. They have the weirdest example of a team trying to make the playoff because they don't have a game left. Every single one of these other teams, they have a game left, whereas the Ohio State Buckeyes are done because they lost to the Michigan Wolverines. And since the Big Ten still has divisions for this last season, Michigan's facing Iowa out of the West, and Ohio State does not have a game left to play. But a lot of people believe Ohio State is out of the playoff race because of that, but that is not true. Ohio State can still get into the college football playoff if Texas loses, Alabama loses, Oregon loses, and Florida State loses. It would be insane for all of that to happen, for all 4 of those teams to go down. It's highly unlikely, but there's a chance. And since that possibility exists, I can say that the Ohio State Buckeyes still have a chance, even though most people would say that they don't. Like I said, the scenario is very, very slim. But Florida State would not get in over Ohio State with a loss to Louisville. If Oregon loses, they're out. Texas as well, and Alabama. So Ohio State would grab that number 4 spot. So the Buckeyes have to root for all 4 of those teams to lose to have a chance. And if one of those teams wins, then the Ohio State Buckeyes are eliminated from the playoff. Texas is at number 7, and they have the Oklahoma State Cowboys in the Big 12 championship game. That's a sneaky good game because you look at the fact that the Cowboys have been up and down this year. They were able to knock off the Oklahoma Sooners, but then Oklahoma State lost to UCF 45-3, and they lost to South Alabama earlier in the year. So they're a very weird team. Texas has to be careful, but even if Texas wins, they're not guaranteed into the playoff. Texas would have to have Oregon lose, Alabama lose, and Florida State lose to get into the playoff because then they would be at number 4 behind Washington, Michigan, and Georgia. If Washington loses and Oregon wins, that would be weird because Texas could get in over Washington in that scenario, but there's a shot if Washington barely loses that game that the committee puts Washington in over the Texas Longhorns by a hair, but even then Texas would still have a chance, but it would be best for the Longhorns to root for an Oregon loss, an Alabama loss, and a Florida State loss to get into the college football playoff. If they lose to Oklahoma State, they are definitely done for sure. And the last team that has a chance to get into the college football playoff is the Alabama Crimson Tide. And the reason why I said that Texas needs a loss from Alabama, some people would disagree with this because Alabama lost to Texas, so the Longhorns have the head-to-head. But if Alabama beats the Georgia Bulldogs, there is a chance that the College Football Playoff Committee, even if Texas blows the doors off Oklahoma State, would have Alabama jump Texas because they beat Georgia, which would be a better win than Texas's win over the Alabama Crimson Tide. Again, some people might disagree, and I'm not saying that would be the case because of the fact that head-to-head does matter, and Texas getting that win in Bryant-Denny Stadium was very impressive. No team has won in Bryant-Denny Stadium in 4 years, so that should be taken into account. But if Alabama can beat the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship game, which obviously Alabama has to do to have any chance to get in, there's a shot they leapfrog Texas. But what's more realistic for Alabama is that if Texas loses, if Oregon loses, and Florida State loses, Alabama will get into the college football playoff because they would leapfrog Ohio State, who has the 1 loss, and they were not able to get a Big Ten championship. And Alabama would have that SEC championship win over Georgia, so they would leapfrog them, and Alabama would slide into the number 4 spot behind the Washington Huskies, Michigan Wolverines, and Georgia would probably be at number 3. I don't think that they would have Alabama leapfrog Georgia, but maybe they would have Alabama go to 3 and Georgia to 4. Who knows in that scenario? But again, Alabama needs Texas and Oregon and Florida State to lose. I see no scenario where Alabama can get in if Oregon and the Florida State Seminoles win, because then they would probably be on the outside looking in at number 5 or number 6. And all these teams below, looking at the Missouri Tigers, Penn State, Nittany Lions, Ole Miss Rebels, they all have 2 losses. They have no shot to make the college football playoff. So it's down to the 8 teams: Georgia, Michigan, Michigan, Washington, Florida State, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Alabama can all make the college football playoff. And those are all the remaining scenarios that could happen for the college football playoff based on the results that are going to happen this weekend in the conference championship games. It's going to be a wild ride. Cannot wait for the games. And it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out and which teams ultimately make the college football playoff. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about my remaining scenarios for the college football playoff. Which of the scenarios you think is most likely to happen and which teams you think will make the college football playoff at the end of the day based on how you think the games are going to go this weekend. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.